YouTuber Darksydephil is on the verge of beating Hollow Knight Silksong. Not Act 2, Act 3. So Darksydephil has more credibility than any of these other YouTubers that have failed to even unlock Act 3. And you could argue that, maybe he used guides or maybe he had his chat helping him out, because I noticed he has more masks than I do when I watched him play. So I guess he had a little bit of help, or he looked everything up or what have you. He has a history of doing that. But the simple fact of the matter is that if Hollow Knight Silksong was a truly, genuinely difficult game, Darksydephil would never have been able to finish it. He would never have been able to get through this thing. He would never have been able to beat it. And instead, he's been able to cheese the entire thing, I think, by using like cogflies and just, cheap, like scrubby tactics. And that's all you really need to do in Silksong is just walk around, find a boss, beat it in some contrived manner, and then just move on. Like Silksong is not a difficult video game, and Darksydephil beating it should prove that to pretty much everyone. So the entire cope, that Silksong fans have had in regard to this game, that it's just hard, like it all just completely falls apart when you realize that Darksydephil can beat the game. If Phil can do it, anybody can do it. So with that being said, what is the game's legacy going to be now that people know how to exploit it? Because it's quite a bit different than the original Hollow Knight, where all you had to do was learn enemy patterns and upgrade your nail and like take advantage of like the very wide openings to heal your character. Like in Silksong, you kind of just have to exploit tools. You kind of have to like build your character. You kind of have to like find the playstyle you want. There's so many steps you need to take in before you can like start exploiting Silksong's very real, very basic just things, like you can take advantage of just how exploitable the enemy AI actually is. Once you start powering up and start like getting to that point where you know how everything in the game works, the game becomes honestly kind of trivial. And I think the reception to Act 3, how it's basically just walking around a bunch of old areas, finding one boss that you missed the previous time, and then just going back to like fight Lace, like that's all you do in Act 3. There's no real thought put into it. There's no consideration. There's no real like depth to the gameplay. It is a game so easy that Phil Burnell can beat it. And that's been my mindset, ever since I finished it, is that the game is padded. It's padded out to shit. It's bursting into the seams with like filler content with a handful of bosses strewn throughout. But, if you can beat the bosses, which is very easy to do once you have the proper equipment, and can take enough hits, like the game really genuinely is not that challenging. And I think Phil is demonstrating that very clearly. If the game was actually hard, he would have gotten filtered by it so much that he wouldn't be able to beat it. This is a guy who can't even consistently win Mario Kart races. And we're supposed to believe that he can beat Silksong? Like, no. The answer is no. Like Darksydephil is a complete and total pleb who is completely reliant on his chat to handhold him through the game. Like the simple fact of the matter is, if you know what the best builds are, if you know where the best equipment is, if you know like where the masks are, like if you know how to like power up your character, you are going to cut through everything in Silksong with very little effort. I can tell you myself, I had 6 masks by the end. I did not fully upgrade my nail, and I still had no problems beating Lost Lace. Like in a game where 6 hits basically means 3 hits, 6 masks means 3 hits and you're dead. Essentially, you can heal. Which is how I got through it. But the fact of the matter is, the game, when you're properly powered up, gives you plenty of opportunities to take advantage of the enemy's weaknesses and just exploit them. The game just is very, very, if you don't have the proper material or equipment or don't know how to use it properly, like you're just going to struggle a little bit. And that's why Phil is just breezing through this game, is because he's being told where everything is. He's told how to use it. He's told how to apply it. He's told, like, the strats that players have come up with over the past month. And like, he's beating the game because at its core, Silksong does not take a lot of actual skill to beat. Silksong is a game that is very easily exploitable. It is very simple. It is very basic. There's not a whole lot going on with it. And Darksydephil is going to beat it because it's easy, because it's not that hard, because like he's being handheld through his chat. Like it, Darksydephil is demonstrating how these soul slop titles just don't really hold up under any kind of scrutiny. Like Darksydephil cannot compete, cannot play actual video games, and as a result, he has to resort to slop like Silksong, stuff that's very easy, very basic, very simplistic, games that will take probably less than 10 hours to get through if you know what you're doing. Like, Darksydephil is just not that talented of a gamer. And because he's not that talented, like, we can safely infer that Hollow Knight Silksong is simply not on the level of quality of more difficult games. Like, there are games that DSP has rage quit before. Persona 3 on easy difficulty has to be easier than Hollow Knight Silksong, because Darksydephil rage quit the final boss because of the charms, because of the status conditions, because of just how difficult the game had been for him to get through. Persona 3, I think, has more credibility as being considered a difficult game than Silksong does, because no matter how much DSP grinds or how much he plays the game, like, he's not going to have the exact builds he needs to beat that final boss. Like, the guides could not help him, in that situation. The chat could not help him. Persona 3 was a harder game than Silksong. And I suppose that's kind of where I want to leave off on. This idea that Darksydephil is just, it should be a litmus test. If Darksydephil can beat a game, it's not hard. If the streamer can beat a game, it's not that difficult. Silksong at every opportunity has demonstrated that pretty much everyone who picks it up can get through Act 3 and beat the game with very little effort.